With 3 generations of experience dating back to 1960, the Masamuto family has designed, built, and managed tens of thousands of projects, earning a reputation as a top-rated contractor and placing in the top 5% of all licensed contractors in California. This show pulls back the curtain on construction, leadership, and life, so you can avoid costly mistakes, eliminate chaos, and build with confidence at home and in business. This is where craftsmanship meets mindset. And here are your hosts, Gino and Mario Mazzamuto.
Today, we want to talk about coaching. So this is a place that Mario knows a lot of, so I'll let him take the lead.
Well, sure. Maybe the best way to start is to talk about kind of what actually got us interested in coaching, because we have a business coach. And well, we start there and start kind of talking about that. We can probably dive off into the weeds a little bit.
For us, growing the business to the scale that we wanted to be at, not only from where we came from, us being just guys that worked in the field, to now running a company, there's a lot that goes on that you don't understand. The way you lose money when you scale is not being organized. And most contractors don't fail because they skill, they fail because they lack the perspective. And we can frame a house and you can close a deal and you can manage a crew, but can you see the blind spots all between these different things? And those blind spots are the things that cost you money, time, and ultimately your legacy, because these things suck all the profit and time and add the frustration to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the main thing about coaching is the goal of it is to shorten the learning curve and to basically speed up, just your success ultimately, and to help mitigate failure and potentially mitigate, losing your business or going bankrupt or whatever. It's just like, for anybody who's learned a sport, if you played basketball or baseball or soccer or, wrestling or whatever, any of those things, all of us had coaches for those items. Can you learn things on your own? Sure. But how do you learn? Through mistakes. That's how, everybody learned how to ride a bike and, do all that stuff is by falling. And the whole goal of getting a coach is to speed up the process, make it so it's less bumpy, and it helps really to guarantee a success. And also, for Gino and I, we don't want to be those typical quote unquote contractors you see walking around with, a cigarette hanging out of their mouth and, drinking all the time and all that, because they didn't ask for help and get guidance. And then they turn to, it can be very stressful. And so by having that coach, you really have somebody good, a mentor that you can lean back on and help really shorten the learning curve and frustrations.
Yeah. And I think that, that goes to the myth, which I think the younger generations might have more of a handle on it than the older generations, but there's always that myth in construction and entrepreneurship where if you work harder, you'll figure it out. And the thing is, you can do that. And there's a lot of people that have succeeded in doing that. But the problem is that you always run the risk of those pitfalls that can bankrupt you, if you're talking about financial pitfalls, especially in larger organizations, because the hardest thing about running a large company is now you're no longer the guy that has your hand on all the different aspects. So you're having to delegate those things. Most coaches will tell you that's one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs to do, because most entrepreneurs are very self-driven people, and that's why they become entrepreneurs. And so when they have to start giving up that power or that responsibility to other people, it's hard for them to do that. But when you do that, you have to give people the room, to basically be autonomous. But in doing so, you're also giving them the freedom to make mistakes, and that's okay to a certain extent. You want to minimize those. But when you grow an organization, it's not you just making a mistake. Potentially, it's one of your employees, whether that's your project management manager, your estimator, your pre-operations manager, whoever you're talking about. And when those mistakes start to compound because you're not paying attention to them, that's how you can get into real trouble.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's also important to talk about the different types of coaching that there are. And there's obviously if you're in the trades, then you likely had some point in time a mentor or a coach that kind of got you going. In our case, one of our main coaches or mentors is our dad. But what you have to remember too is that, our dad was brought up, he was born in the 40s, brought up in the 50s and the 60s. And so his style of construction was built then without technology and back then. And so, Gino and I, we want to continue the legacy of our business, but we don't necessarily want to run it exactly the same as our dad ran it. And there's huge pieces that we want to continue to run the same. But for instance, he never used technology, did everything by hand, never used even a computer. And so at that point in time, we're forced in so many ways to either figure out on our own or go out and find the mentors that are doing the things that we want to do. And so running their business like we want to run. And so that's ultimately what coaching is all about. You're seeking those mentors and you're saying, how can I learn to do what you do? How can I shorten the learning curve? How can I make less mistakes? And so that's kind of what brought us down the path for us to go find, a mentor or a coach, if you will. And then beyond that, there's different levels of it. So for us, we do two different types of coaching, which is one-on-one coaching with a coach as well as group coaching. And the group coaching can actually be super beneficial. A lot of times it's cheaper because that one coach can get on one call versus say 20. If there's 20 people on the group coaching call, versus imagine if they had to do 20 individual phone calls. They'd have to spend a whole lot more time, right? So they can lower their fee by doing that group coaching call. But in some ways it can be really beneficial because you may not know all the right questions to ask. And so if you have 20 people in a group, even 5 people in a group, the likeliness, let's just say 5 people, the likeliness that the right questions are going to get asked probably increases fivefold because there's 5 different people that could ask those questions. I've been in many group coaching calls that people ask questions. I go, oh my God, I didn't even think about asking that. That's a great question. I'm glad this person's in here to ask those questions.
Yeah. And I think going back to the mentorship thing and talking about, like our father doing stuff, the thing is, if you think about how you were trained up in any kind of aspect, in construction or any other trade, you're always going to have somebody that teaching you. If you say that you're apprentice carpenter, you're not going to go on to the job and right away start doing stuff. A lot of times when you get on the job as a new guy, they don't even let you touch power tools until you got to start from cleaning up the job site. And then, they slowly start delegating more and more responsibility as you show that you one have the aptitude to do it and can be trusted with the more dangerous stuff. But the point being is that you have somebody that's guiding you through the process, teaching you, you don't hold the 2x4 like this when you cut it, or whatever the issue is, but they're training you up on it. So what is the difference between that and when you're trying to run a business? Because the truth is that, and we've discussed this in previous podcasts, but the thing is, a lot of contractors, they, in my experience, have tried to run a business. There's guys that work in the field, and there's some guys that even work for us now. And I always think it's kind of interesting to know that there's a lot of home inspectors or building inspectors that once were contractors. So, but there's a difference between being a contractor in the terms of you are the guy in the field doing stuff. Maybe you have a few crew members, but you're mainly out there every day doing something, versus having, 10 to 20 guys. And then at that point in time, you can't be the guy in the field doing that because you're running a bigger thing. And it's a whole different beast. And a lot of these guys have tried to do that and failed and went back to, and I see this all the time. And, cause I'm on Facebook threads and different threads of contractors. And there's a lot of guys that end up going back to just being a one-man crew or a one-man crew with some team members because they find managing all the guys it's too hard to do. It takes a whole different skill set to do that.
Totally. Yeah. We actually have probably a third of our team members used to run their own companies, used to run their own teams. And they got to the point, every one of them, that they, were just tired of trying to figure it out. And so it's just easier for them to work with us and let us manage all the work, customers, jobs, expenses, income. I mean, you name it. We manage everything, and they show up and, obviously their job is hard in itself doing what they do, but that's what they came to realize is that what Gino just said is that most contractors' version of scaling is like, an earbud in their ear or Bluetooth or whatever while they're swinging a hammer, doing stuff and taking care of customers while they're on a job site. And it's like, yeah, there's no way. There's no way you could scale a company by
And the
doing it
thing
that
is,
way.
it's not like because you brought up a good point about having, your earbud in on a job site. You don't go from being one guy, because at some point in time, if you decide to be a contractor or a carpenter, okay, it's just you. And then you go out and you get jobs and you get some work, and then you bring on one guy, and then you do those jobs, and then maybe you get some more work, and then you bring on another guy. It's such a slow grind. You don't go from, oh, I want to open a business, to going out and hiring 15 guys and then going to get work. You got to get the work before you get the guys. So it's a slow scale up. And the thing is, every time it's like a video game. You get levels, it gets harder and harder. And there's different challenges that you face on every different level. And the problem is that, and this is why it goes back to coaching, is you have to understand what you're good at and what you're bad at. So for example, for us in our business, Mario's the primary salesperson and I'm the primary estimator in the company, because we learned what we're good at, and we played to our strengths. And just like anything, you have to figure that. And if you don't, if you're trying to do bookkeeping and you suck at math, okay, then that's not going to work. If you're trying to run jobs and do coordination, but you're not very organized and you have a dashboard full of receipts and you don't have anything on the calendar, then you're not going to be, obviously that's not going to work. So, and that's the problem, is you have guys that try to do every little aspect of it. And in the beginning, you're probably most likely going to have to do that and fail a lot until you trudge through it enough to where you can actually hire somebody to do those things. But the coaching is so important, because if you can minimize those mistakes that you make as you're learning these different things, then you can speed up that process. And one of the things that I always that sticks with me is you hear about like coaching. Okay, I mean, some coaches can cost 10, 20, 30, 40, you name it, $60,000 a year for a coach. And you think to yourself, that's a lot of money. I can't afford that now. And there's always going to be a time in your life where that makes sense and it doesn't make sense. I think you also don't want to do it too early, where you don't have things in place, because they're going to be telling you to do things that you're not capable of doing. But there was always a saying that I heard saying what the cost is not to do it. And basically, if you say that you're a company and you're doing $1 million a year, if you don't scale and you don't have a coach that helps you grow, and you actually have the potential to do $4 million a year, well, you not doing that investment of 60,000 now has cost you 3 million, because you could have been at that $4 million mark, but you're stuck at that $1 million mark because you don't know how to get past that.
Yeah. And likely if you're stuck at that $1 million mark, you're ultimately probably not going to be as happy. And it's not that $1 million is not enough, because it's enough for most everybody, but it has nothing to do with what's enough and what's not enough. And this goes back to, I'll get into a little bit of psychology of why all this stuff works. And, this is somewhat debatable, but I think anybody who knows what they're talking about will agree with this. It's actually, this saying is even found in the Bible. So it's something that is and other religions as well as Christianity. And it's, if you're not growing, you're dying. And it's kind of like what's in the Bible is, without a vision, the people will perish, right? So what that means is that when you get stagnant, you internally die, you get bored, you get jaded, you get all those things, because it's natural. It's a natural progression for people to continue to grow. So when you get stuck at any place and you plateau, the biggest issue with a plateau, you would think it would almost be like, well, if you got your business to a point to where you don't have to do anything, you can just live off the money, that's like perfect. But unless your hobbies are your whole entire life, it's not gonna make you happy. And if you already are starting to grow and you plateau, the weird the weirdest thing will happen and you won't even know why. You'll get depressed, you'll get bored, all these bad things will happen because you're so used to progressing and growing and you hit this plateau and you're internally freaking out and most people don't even realize it. They don't even know what they're even going through. And again, this is why coaching is actually so important, to have somebody else point this out to you and to help that person that helps you continue to grow. And a lot of people would be reluctant to hire a coach because they think, I don't want that kind of pressure on me. I don't want a person pushing me. That's not what a coach is. Can a coach be an accountability partner? Sure. Can a coach be a person that holds you accountable? Sure. Do we all need that? Yeah, more than we think. And will it make us happier in the end? Yes, it will. And that's a guarantee. And, I'll quote a few other people like Jocko Willink, for anybody who's heard of him, is discipline equals freedom. And so what he means by that is that if you actually have some discipline, it might be difficult in the beginning, but it will ultimately lead to you being more free because you finally get the things done that you need to get done. And, we all have a certain amount of procrastination, fear, all these other things. And by getting the right coach and the right team and all that, you're getting pushed just enough and you're being held accountable just enough that is within your comfortability. And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it, and the more you actually like being pushed and like being accountable. I don't know about anybody else, but I know for myself, I'll do way more for other people than I ever would for myself. And that is most people. Most people, we feel a responsibility greater for other people. It's like how many times you schedule something or say you're going to do something and you just don't do it because something else pops up that somebody else needs something. And so you just go do that. And when you have something scheduled with, say, a customer or a job or whatever, rarely do you miss that thing. And if you do, you're beating yourself up over it. Versus how many times you say that you're going to go do something for yourself or your wife or your kids and you just don't do it because you don't feel that same amount of accountability. But this is where coaching and having some accountability and all that stuff actually helps teach you in all those areas, and it helps you to level up all those areas. And ultimately, it more than money, because it's not about money. Money is only a piece of the puzzle. It's more about happiness, being content, being fulfilled, all those other items that you get through, having all these goals.
Yeah. And I think to add to that point is we don't get into this business because we want to make money. I think obviously that's a driving thing, but we want to create a lifestyle for ourselves. And I think when you get into it, you might start off with the idea of you want to build a business so you can walk away from it. I think that is the ultimate goal in a lot of ways because it allows you freedom. But what you find, just like you stated, is that you can only fill your time with so many abstract things. You can only golf so much, you can only fish so much. And as human beings, why do we try to get to the moon? Why do we try to do all of these things? Is because we're always trying to, it's man getting on a ship and going out and trying to find another continent because we're never satisfied with if we're not growing. And especially if you're the type of person that takes on this kind of business, because this is probably, I would say, but the most challenging industry that you can get into because it so many aspects that you have to take on, plus balancing the personal and business life because you don't work 9 to 5, and so you always have to find that balance. But if you're a driven person, you're never going to want to just stop and walk away from it. You're always going to want to grow and improve, and that's why even in this business you have those what we call shiny object syndrome, where you're doing this and you go, my buddy's making a lot of money in HVAC or something. I want to do that. Or what if we do this? And it's hard to stay on track for what you're doing and really get that down. And because you're always trying to jump to the next thing, because that's just the way an entrepreneur is. Your mind is constantly clicking and moving and trying to come up with new things. And to focus that on the business is sometimes hard to do, and you really got to train yourself to do it. So yeah, it's one of those things you got if you really want to get into the gym to lose weight, you might not need a coach. But if you want to get into being a professional bodybuilder, you're not going to just go in there and start working out. You're going to hire somebody that knows, shows you how to work out, shows you how to pose, shows you how to eat right, and all that kind of thing. There's no difference in business coaching. I think the only thing you have to be careful of is, obviously, there's a lot of people that say they're business coaches and aren't really business coaches. So you got to make sure that and it has to be industry specific. I mean, you can probably get a motivational coach if that's what you need, if you feel you need that kind of drive. But I think most people in this industry already have that kind of drive. It's more the precision learning of the things that you really need to implement in a business to make all the cogs work together. And I think for me, that's been the hardest thing about growing a business is finding out things you realize you didn't know, but sometimes it's too late. You've already made that mistake, and now you go, okay, now I know that. But you do that so many times and you start to get fatigued by that, because now you're always anticipating the next thing that potentially you're going to fumble into. So it doesn't matter if you're doing 1 million, 4 million, 10 million. If you're trying to grow in any aspect, it makes sense to do the business coaching. And I don't think you necessarily have to go for like the high tier people either. I mean, we've been approached to do coaching just because we're at a different level than other people.
We don't listen to our parents.
So, so coaching is a big thing. And to look for inspiration on different things, but also I think to really push yourself.
Yep. Yeah. No, for sure. I'll give a little bit of a backstory too of why Gino said that was why he was going to let me take the wheel into the coaching, because I've now had a coach and been coaching overall for pretty close to 20 years, probably. I think about 20 years ago is when I hired my first coach. And since then, I've hired coaches in a lot of different arenas and areas, and I've coached a lot of people in other arenas and areas, and I've joined a lot of other entrepreneurial groups and helped grow a couple of them. And those are a different kind of coaching aspect. Those are where you're basically coaching each other in so many ways, and that's a different kind of a big accountability group, I guess, like that, if you will. And so I didn't push the coaching for our business, and so it was actually Gino that was interested in it. But when Gino presented me with it, it was a pretty easy choice for me to tell you that I think we should do it, because I've been there and I've seen it, and because I'm actually myself a certified life coach with two different organizations. I've coached a lot of students, so I know both ends of it, and I know how impactful it is, and it's made the biggest impact of my life is to have to basically you're paying for a mentor, if you will. So, a couple hundred years ago, even 100 years ago, if you wanted your son to become a carpenter, you helped your son find a mentor, somebody to be the apprentice. And a lot of times that apprenticeship was a trade-off. You had to, the parent is the one who basically begged that person to apprentice their kid for them, give them a better life and all that. Maybe they had to make a trade to them. So some way, shape, or form, it's actually technically never been free. When you go and work for somebody and you are their apprentice, you're working at a lower wage than you would otherwise. You're not a journeyman yet, so you're technically paying for it. You're paying for it with your time. So let's just say, okay, I want to become a contractor, square one. Where are you going to learn that from? You could read a bunch of books, bunch of podcasts, go work for a contractor, and maybe after like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then maybe you'll be ready to go out on your own and start your own company and stuff like that. Versus doing the same, but then also hiring a coach, you can probably exponentially speed that up, make a whole lot less mistakes. And you'd be that person that would be talking to other contractors. And when they were telling all their war stories about, oh man, I went bankrupt before and I lost this and I've been through a divorce and all this. And you can say to yourself, if you had done it in the beginning and got a good mentor up front, and again, you don't have to pay a ton of money for a mentor. Maybe you just, again, joining some group coaching, or maybe you're just taking upon yourself to group coaching could theoretically be just being really good at listening to a lot of podcasts and reading a lot of books on it. I mean, you can be coached by people and never actually have contact with them. And it's a lot harder to push yourself when you don't have a little bit of that commitment. Like, I don't have to show up at, Wednesday at 9 a.m. is my coaching call every Wednesday at 9 a.m. or, whatever it is, right? If you're just left in your own devices, that you may not be showing up. So that's where paying for it, paying a little bit of money, making that commitment, and weirdly enough, by actually paying money, you're more likely to show up as well.
Because you're committing a resource, whereas it's not, you're putting a value to something. And so there's a lot, you had mentioned the group coaching. And I think one of the things that people make mistakes on is they try to save money by not investing in certain things up front. You don't want to mix, group coaching is one thing, men's groups and other things like that are another thing. If you think that you're going to get the education you need from being with people that are in the same boat as you, you're not, because the whole point of a coach is that person's in a place that you want to be. You're trying to get yourself to that position. Now, if you're working or hanging around other people or in conversation groups with other contractors that at the same level as you, then you're never going to get the insights, because if they had those insights, they wouldn't be at the same level as you. And it's like that, you're the pack that you run with type of situation, right? So you always want to put yourself around people that are in a higher position than you, because you're going to get that knowledge, whether that's direct knowledge that they're giving you because you ask a question, or just being around somebody enough to where you start to pick up on certain habitual things that they do, the way they talk, the way they interact with people, maybe the way they dress, they present themselves. And I think that's the thing about coaching that's so important, is it's not just about don't do this and do that. It's about why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And when you talk to somebody, look them in the eye. And I keep going back to this in previous podcasts, but the more that we dive into construction and go through the growing elements of it, starting off from one guy to now having 20 employees plus, is that you really start to see it becomes a psychological thing. There's so many aspects of it that you can't even in a conversation like this dive into, because it's so nuanced. And because you're looking at things like, do you charge for an estimate or not? Do you how do you present an estimate, the finances, that one of the big things that the coaching for us has helped is we are all blue collar guys, so trying to run a business and implement the structural stuff of a business, I think that's the hardest aspect of anything that you do. And the thing is, the busier you get, sometimes you fall into that pit hole of, oh, I'm really busy, I'm making a lot of money, but that's actually the most dangerous part, because when you're so busy and you lose perspective on different things, it's being very organized. That's going to be the key. It's not going out and just hitting the grindstone and closing more deals, because you can do that to a certain extent and mitigate the things that you're losing because you're not paying attention to them. But at some point in time, those things are going to work out in your favor, and you might not be able to generate the income that you're producing. And then those small gaps become big things that now just tank the company. And that's, I think when you're talking about business owners, you have kind of a few categories. You have guys that have made it and are successful, guys that have made it and are super successful, and then guys that have tried it and failed. And typically when you fail, it's not just, I tried it and it didn't work out for me. It usually comes with a big, like, no, I went bankrupt. I owed $100,000 in taxes. I couldn't pay for it. Things just kept accruing. And that's the kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. And that, unfortunately, is a lot of the case for people who learn the hard way in growing their own business, because we hear the positives of business, like, look at all these other businesses that are making money. But a lot of people, for some reason, just don't remember is that 1 out of 10 businesses will fail within the first 5 years. And after that, it's again, or excuse, not 1 out of 10, 9 out of 10. I said 1 out of 10. That's too good of a. It's a very high stat. It's a very high stat. And again, maybe those, 8 out of those 9 that fail could have survived it had they gotten some better mentorship around that, better planning before they went out on their own and all that. And so it's kind of like what you had said, is that for sure we all learn by failing. Lincoln, who was maybe our most beloved and known president of all time, that guy, he had some of the biggest failures. I don't remember them off the top of my head. You have to Google it, but you read his list of failures, like how many times he failed the bar exam, how many times he started a business and failed that. He got married, his wife died. I think he had kids and they died. I mean, you name it, the thing happened to him. He had mental breakdowns and all kinds of stuff. He went on to become one of the greatest presidents that ever lived. And he's kind of like the Rocky Balboa story. But there's also, for every Rocky Balboa story and Abe Lincoln story, there's also thousands upon thousands of people that lost it all and became homeless or crazy or just gave up on life because it was too difficult. And so, there's these big grand stories that we know of, but sometimes when you risk it all, there's no coming back from that. And so rather than just risking it all like a gamble, you could mitigate that by getting a good mentor in place and kind of taking that process a little bit slower and a little bit more methodical and a little bit more planned out. And by doing so, you're basically setting yourself up for success, and you're setting your family up for success. And you know just go listen to stories of why people, why their marriages don't work and stuff like that. It's because they're not being really methodical about all of that stuff. They're just kind of jumping into it. And yeah, be getting married and having kids, a lot of it is just finally taking the leap. But also it's still about putting effort into it. I would say for myself, I treat my marriage like I do business. I read relationship books and listen to podcasts on that, and I try to make the extra effort. I'm not like the best husband in the world, but I try to be the best I can be for sure and think about that sort of stuff. And so it's what coaching does is it levels everything up. It makes everything a lot easier, to be quite honest. And when you learn through coaching and you can be coached yourself, everything in every aspect of your life gets better. Your personal life gets better, your business life gets better, all of that gets better.
And I think that's something you touched on you need to hone in on that a little bit, because we're talking about going out and getting a coach to elevate yourself from whatever position that you're in, whether you're one guy by yourself or a large company. Again, there's stages of growth, and sometimes you get stuck at those stages. But being coachable, what you just said, is also a big thing. Some people, and I think maybe just because we're in the industry, I see it more, is a lot of these guys, even with guys that we've talked to that have owned businesses, if you ask them why they failed, they're never going to say because I wasn't able to do this, or I didn't know this and I made this mistake and things like that. Typically, they're going to put it off onto something else. I had bad employees. The customers drove me crazy. California, you can't own a business in California because the taxes suck you dry. But the thing is, if you really looked at it, it was a failure of them to understand the issues at hand. And the coachability is a big aspect, because you have to humble yourself enough to understand that you don't understand everything. And when you get into these businesses, you typically are a certain kind of person that's a self-driven person. You got to get up in the morning and push through the obstacles. You got to deal with the failures. You got to deal with all the learning curves, and you got to get up the next day and do it all again. And that takes a lot of resilience and a lot of self-discipline. And sometimes you get to the point where you have created yourself kind of a bullheadedness in yourself, that you keep pushing through these things. And then when somebody tries to tell you, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing like that, why don't you try this?" You're kind of like, I've gotten this far on this. I don't need to have that, I don't need to take that person's perspective. And I'm not saying you listen to everything that everybody says, but you have to know when somebody says something that makes sense, and humble yourself to go, okay, I should have known that. Now I'll implement that the next time. And unfortunately, a lot of times it takes you making that own mistake yourself to do it. And just like going back to the parents trying to give us their life lessons, if we just listen to some people, sometimes we make the same mistakes and we go, I should have listened to my father. Or I should have listened to my mother. They told me about this, but I didn't. I had to make the mistake for myself.
For
Now,
sure.
most of those things you can overcome and get past them. But again, sometimes those mistakes are so big that you don't know how to get through it. And that I think one of the things that for us in the business as we grew, it for me personally on the estimating side, it was estimating is such a complex category, and we should probably do another podcast just specifically on estimating. But when you grow a company and you're one guy, maybe and a helper, and you're estimating a job, there's not a lot of things that you have to consider when estimating that job as far as your overhead and profitability and margins and markups and all that kind of stuff. When you have an overhead of a large company, that's a different thing. And if you don't learn how to estimate appropriately based on the size of your company, you're going to be undermining yourself and not even knowing it. And so it's like you're not going to go out and take a finance course and learn, what markups and margins are and soft costs and different things you know, that you have to learn on a daily basis because you still have to work every day. So to bring somebody in that can tell you about these things before you learn, because a lot of companies, what happens is they get busy, they make a lot of money, but they see the money going out just as fast as it's coming in.
For sure. Yeah. So I think that a good way to wrap up this podcast is just with a few pieces of advice and bullet points, which is, um, you know, go out there and seek out, no matter where you're at, for just starting, go watch some YouTube videos, some podcasts, read some books about it. It would be advisable that eventually you go and get around other contractors and get in some group coaching or some one-on-one coaching with other contractors and learn yourself up from there. And then ultimately dedicate yourself to that, be a lifelong learner, be teachable, humble yourself and try to let that ego go a little bit. Maybe go read, Ego is the Enemy or a few of those other books that Extreme Accountability by Jocko talks a lot about ego. And all that helps. All that helps you to shed all that stuff so that way you could be open to learning, and it will make your life a lot easier, and it will make the journey that much more enjoyable.
If you keep running into things that become bottlenecks, then you're probably going to need a coach to get you past them. Because if you haven't been able to fix it and it continues to be a perpetual problem, then you're probably not going to be able to fix it on your own. So anyhow, we hope that this podcast was able to help you out as much as we can. Again, the whole point is to be educational as far as the experiences that we've had.
I'm Mario. Have a good one.